In the peaceful suburbs of Oak Creek, Virginia, where morning walks are as routine as the rising sun, an unexpected visitor arrived. Not a new neighbor, but a bobcat kitten. Small, tuft-eared, and fearless. Instead of shying away, he greeted everyone he met. The neighborhood was charmed. Everyone called him Rusty and left treats for the little bobcat. To most people, he was a harmless and cute little wild cat. But to Arthur Peterson, he saw what others missed. Subtle desperation behind the kittens. Friendly chirps. When he decided to follow the kitten's trail, he uncovered a secret. Where was this tiny creature going? The truth lay hidden, and the discovery would be more heartbreaking and shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The town of Oak Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of northern Virginia, was the kind of place where time seemed to flow a little slower. Manicured lawns bled into the untamed edges of the Shenandoah woods, and the residents, a mix of young families and settled retirees, valued the quiet predictability of their lives. Arthur Peterson was one of them. At 72, his days were structured by a gentle, unyielding routine. Coffee on the porch at dawn, the crossword puzzle by mid-morning, and a slow, thoughtful walk around the neighborhood in the late afternoon. It was on one of these walks during the hazy golden light of a late September day that the routine was first broken. As Art rounded the corner onto Sycamore Lane, a street that ran closest to the dense forest line, he saw a small flicker of movement near the curb. Wasn't a squirrel or a chipmunk. Their frantic energy was familiar to him. This was something different, slower, more deliberate. He paused, leaning lightly on the handsome oak cane his late wife Eleanor had given him. There, sitting with an almost regal composure on the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the road, was a kitten. But it wasn't a house cat. Its coat was a tapestry of dappled browns and soft grays. Its paws were a little too big for its body, and its ears, the dead giveaway, were tipped with distinct black tufts. It was a bobcat, a baby, no bigger than a shoebox, but a wild creature nonetheless. Art froze. His first instinct was a jolt of concern. A bobcat this close to homes was unusual, and one this young alone was a sign that something was wrong. He expected it to bolt the second it saw him, to vanish back into the deep shadows of the woods just 50 yards away. Instead, the kitten turned its head, fixed him with wide, intelligent eyes, and let out a soft, inquisitive chirp. It was a sound entirely at odds with the fierce predator it would one day become. It took a tentative step towards him, then another. It stopped about 10 feet away, sat back on its hunches, and simply watched him, its tiny tufted ears swiveling to catch the rustle of leaves in the afternoon breeze. Art was mesmerized. He had lived in Oak Creek for 40 years, and had only ever caught fleeting, ghostly glimpses of adult bobcats at the furthest edge of his property, always at dusk, always disappearing in a heartbeat. This felt like a sacred violation of an unspoken rule between their two worlds. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, a silent observer in a strange tableau. Finally, the kitten seemed to grow bored. It gave a dismissive flick of its stubby tail, turned, and trotted nonchalantly along the curb before disappearing into Mrs. Gable's prize-winning Elia bushes. Art continued his walk, his mind buzzing. Where was its mother? A mother bobcat would be fiercely protective. She would never let her kitten wander into the open like this, let alone approach a human. He scanned the tree, a prickle of unease on his neck, half expecting to see a pair of angry yellow eyes watching him from the shadows. He saw nothing but the dense tangle of oaks and hickories. The next day, the kitten was there again. This time, it was batting at a fallen maple leaf on the sidewalk. When Art approached, it repeated its performance, chirping a greeting and watching him with that same unnerving curiosity. This time, Art spoke to it. "You're a long way from home, little fellow," he murmured, his voice soft. "You ought to be more careful." The kitten, of course, didn't understand. It just blinked slowly as if considering his words before pouncing on the leaf again. Soon, the Bobcat Kitten became a neighborhood fixture. The Johnson kids, who lived 2 houses down from Art, were the first to give it a name. Rusty for the reddish tinge in its spotted coat. They were fascinated and would watch from their porch, their parents having sternly warned them not to get any closer. Mrs. Gable, whose Eela's had become Rusty's preferred daytime lounge, was a nervous wreck at first. "Arthur, it's a wild animal," she'd said, wringing her hands as she stood by her mailbox. "It's not right. What if it has rabies?" "He's just a baby, Martha," Art had reassured her. "And he looks perfectly healthy. Just lost." But as the days turned into a week, then, too, loss started to seem like a permanent condition. Rusty's boldness grew. He would trot out to greet the mailman's truck, sitting and watching patiently as if expecting a delivery of his own. He would follow joggers for a few yards, his gait a clumsy, adorable mimicry of their rhythm. People would stop their cars to stare, pulling out their phones to take pictures of the tiny, tufted-eared celebrity of Sycamore Lane. The community's fear softened into a kind of collective, gentle custody. Someone left a bowl of water out. Another person, after seeing Rusty expertly pounce on and devour a field mouse, started leaving out small scraps of leftover chicken. Art himself was guilty of this, once tearing a piece from his turkey sandwich and tossing it onto the grass. Rusty had devoured it with a gratitude that felt profoundly, heartbreakingly real. But Art's fascination was increasingly shadowed by a deep, nagging worry. He was a practical man, a retired engineer who understood systems and logic, and this system was broken. This kitten should not be here. Every law of nature said so. He started spending less time on his crossword puzzle and more time on his porch, watching. He noticed things others didn't. He saw the subtle tension in Rusty's posture, the way his eyes were always scanning, always alert. He saw how the kitten, despite the handouts, was growing thinner. The gloss on its coat was dulling. This wasn't a charming pet. It was a survivor, and it was struggling. The question of the mother haunted him. Had she been hit by a car, taken by a hunter illegally, or had she simply abandoned her kitten? He'd read online that this was extremely rare. A mother bobcat's bond with her young was powerful. One crisp October afternoon, the kind of day where the sky is a brilliant aching blue, Art saw something that focused his vague worry into a sharp, clear mission. He was watching from his porch, binoculars in hand, when one of the Neighbors, Mr. Henderson, stopped his car to drop a small piece of a granola bar for Rusty. The kitten snatched it up, but instead of eating it, he looked around furtively. Then, with the scrap held firmly in his mouth, he trotted with surprising speed down the street, not towards the woods, but in the opposite direction. Art's curiosity piqued. He grabbed his cane, went inside to slip on his walking shoes, and set off. He kept his distance, walking on the opposite side of the street, using the parked cars and maple trees for cover. Rusty moved with a purpose Art had never seen before. He wasn't greeting or exploring. He was on a mission. He scoured past the last house on the lane and into a patch of overgrown municipal land that separated the neat suburb from a quiet access road. It was a forgotten place full of thorny brambles and wild grass. Art followed, his heart thumping a little faster. The ground was uneven and he had to watch his footing. He lost sight of the kitten for a moment and swore under his breath. Then he saw a flicker of movement near a large culvert pipe that ran under the access road. He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. There, half hidden by a curtain of wild Virginia creeper, was a large iron storm drain grate set into a concrete housing. He watched, holding his breath as Rusty squeezed through a gap in the tangled weeds and disappeared from view. A moment later, he reappeared, his mouth now empty. He sat, licked his paw, and then, as if sensing he was being watched, his head snapped up and his eyes met Art's from across the clearing. There was no friendly chirp this time, just a flat, unreadable stare before he melted back into the undergrowth. Art stood motionless for a long time, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. The trips, the food, the direction. Away from the safety of the woods. He was taking the food somewhere to someone. He knew what he had to do. The next day, he prepared. He packed a small canvas bag with a powerful flashlight, a pair of leatherwork gloves, a bottle of water, and a container of shredded, unseasoned boiled chicken he'd cooked that morning. He felt like a detective on a stakeout. Ella Laner would have found it amusing, this new sense of purpose that had seized him. He could almost hear her gentle, teasing voice. Arthur Peterson, saving the world one stray at a time. The thought brought a sad smile to his lips. He didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, Rusty made his appearance on Sycamore Lane. Art was ready. He walked out to the curb and placed a small pile of the boiled chicken on the grass. Rusty approached cautiously, his nose twitching. He ate half of the chicken, quickly, hungrily. Then, just as Art had predicted, he gathered the remaining shreds in his mouth, gave Art one last fleeting look, and set off on his now familiar path. This time, Art was ready. He followed at a discreet distance, his resolve hardening with every step. He was going to find out the truth. He reached the clearing and watched as Rusty once again vanished behind the curtain of vines. Art gave him a few minutes before he approached the storm drain himself. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and decaying leaves. He could hear the faint drip, drip, drip of water somewhere deep inside. Pulling on his work gloves, he knelt, the motion sending a sharp protest through his old knees. He carefully pushed aside the thick woody stems of the creeper. The iron grate was heavy and rusted, secured with thick bolts. There was no way he could lift it, but On one side, near the concrete edge, erosion had created a small, hollowed-out space, partially obscured by weeds. It was just big enough for a small animal to squeeze through. It was Rusty's secret entrance. Art lay down on his stomach, the damp ground seeping through his trousers. He pressed his face close to the cold iron bars, the smell of rust and stagnant water filling his nostrils. He switched on his flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the oppressive darkness within. The beam landed first on an empty potato chip bag and a discarded soda can. Then he swept it further and his heart stopped. At the back of the wide concrete drain, about 15 feet in, was a pathetic makeshift nest of dried leaves and grass, and lying in it was a bobcat, an adult female. Her coat was matted with mud and filth, and she was terrifyingly thin, her ribs starkly visible beneath her fur. One of her back legs was twisted at a grotesque, unnatural angle, swollen and dark with infection. Her eyes, a pair of luminous gold discs, stared back into the flashlight beam, not with aggression, but with a weary, soul-crushing exhaustion. She was too weak to even lift her head. Then Art saw more movement, nestled against the mother's belly, seeking warmth and comfort. She could barely provide were 2 other kittens. They were much smaller than Rusty, their eyes barely open, squirming feebly. And at that very moment, Rusty trotted into the beam of light, dropped the shredded chicken at his mother's nose, and began to nuzzle her face, chirping softly. The whole devastating truth crashed down on Art with the force of a physical blow. Rusty wasn't a friendly neighborhood mascot. He was a hero. He was a desperate provider, a scout, a son, and a brother. His daily foray onto Sycamore Lane, his charming greetings, his acceptance of food from the giant, frightening creatures of the human world. It wasn't for him. It was for them. He was risking his life every single day, braving cars and dogs and people to bring back scraps of sustenance for his dying mother and starving siblings. He was the only thing standing between his family and death.